All right, week 3 of Celebration of Hope. Great to have you here. I want to welcome those of you joining us online, all of our Willow locations, and those of you in the room. Welcome to week 3 of Celebration of Hope. Who's excited to be here? I love this time of year. I love what we get to do. If you're new or newer around Willow, you're going to get a snapshot of who we are as a church. We're a church that really believes in doing whatever we possibly can to partner with God to serve and come alongside of some of those marginalized people locally and also all around the world. Now, I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, but the truth is we live in a cultural climate today that there's a little bit of a debate going on about whether the government should or shouldn't have a role when it comes to resourcing the global poor. And there's a little bit of debate about which programs or shouldn't or should or shouldn't be serviced. And so there's a little bit of debate in that sphere, and I have no interest in solving that debate today. I have no interest in even speaking to that debate today. However, I would go as far to say there is no debate of whether the people of God should participate in this reality. Because I believe that the church, God's people, I would say it's a biblical mandate that we are called to serve some of the most at-risk, marginalized, poverty-stricken situations in the world. I'm reminded of some words that rolled off of the lips of Jesus himself, Matthew chapter 25. These are the words of Jesus. Here's what he said. He said, "For I was hungry. You gave me something to eat. I was thirsty. You gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." And when Jesus first said these words, the people who heard it be like, "Jesus, I don't remember seeing you in these situations. Jesus, I don't remember seeing you hungry or thirsty. I don't remember seeing you in prison. Like, help me understand." And Jesus says this in response. He says, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine," catch what it says next, "you did this for me." So in other words, every time we're able to provide food for somebody who's hungry, every time we're able to provide water for somebody who's thirsty, every time that we choose to go visit a prisoner who feels really, really lonely, we're not just doing that for somebody in need, we're doing it for the very king that we came to serve. Whatever you do for the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, it's the most tangible expression of how we actually serve Jesus himself. And so as a church here at Willow Creek, we take this really, really seriously. And so we really believe as a church that we are called to serve, to come alongside of, to help those in our local community. We feel very compelled and called to serve those in our global community because we don't believe the kingdom of God has any borders. And so it's not a question whether we serve people locally or globally. It is always a both and. We just want to serve people wherever God calls us to serve. And so Celebration of Hope is the opportunity to look to our global brothers and sisters and find out how we best as a church can come along and really make a difference in serving people, but even more importantly, serving Jesus at the same time. And so throughout this series, we've been looking at some different miracles of Jesus from the Bible. And so today we're gonna look at a miracle that if you've been around the church for any amount of time, maybe this one's gonna feel somewhat familiar. It's a miracle that we now call the feeding of the 5,000. It was such a significant miracle back in Jesus' day that those who were present, Jesus' closest followers, some of which he wrote the Gospels for us. You know, those first 4 books of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, I mean, these people, they're eyewitnesses. They're sharing these incredible stories. And did you know, in the Gospels, there's only 2 miracles that are recorded in all 4 Gospels. Anybody know what they are? The resurrection of Jesus and the feeding of the 5,000. I mean, this miracle had such a mark on Jesus' early disciples that every one of them wrote about it from their own perspective. They include a few different details because there were certain aspects about it that hit them a little bit differently, but the feeding of the 5,000 is recorded in every single one of the Gospels, every single one of the eyewitness accounts about Jesus. Such a significant miracle. Now, I've read the story, I don't know, probably hundreds of times in my life, but I'm telling you, I read it this week, and it had a kind of fresh wash over my life. God showed me some things that maybe I hadn't seen before that I'm excited to share with you. And so again, I could share the story from any one of the 4 Gospels, but for the sake of our conversation today, we're gonna be in the book of Matthew, chapter 14. And so if you got a Bible, you can turn to Matthew 14. If you wanna look that up on a digital device, you can do that. or the words are gonna show up on the screen as well. So here we are, Matthew chapter 14. I'm gonna underline some words on the screen. Now, when you see the underlined words, I need you to read those out loud with me. And do it with some passion, like you really mean it. If you're in Huntley, I wanna hear you all the way from Huntley, right? And so if you're in Wheaton, let me hear you all the way from Wheaton. So here we go. The first one comes up quickly. You're gonna have to be ready. You ready? Okay, 7 people are ready. Here we go. It says, when Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. And so it says, when Jesus heard what had happened, what just happened? Well, if you look at Matthew chapter 13, something tragic has just happened. Jesus has just heard that his cousin, his close companion, the one who's the forerunner of Jesus, a guy by the name of John the Baptist, had just been arrested and beheaded by King Herod. I mean, Herod was this detestable kind of guy, and he executed Jesus' cousin. This horrific news had found its way to Jesus when he was around a large crowd of people. I don't know about you, but have you ever received devastating news when you're around a lot of people? If you've ever been in that circumstance, what was your immediate reaction? What did you want to do? I mean, if you're anything like me, I want to get out of the crowd. I mean, when I hear devastating news, I want to withdraw. Maybe I want to withdraw with 1 or 2 people that I can process it with. Maybe I just need some alone time. I got to kind of get myself together and think about all that's taken place. It's not surprising it says that Jesus withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. It was devastating news that he was trying to get away and have a little bit of me time, if you will. Now, on land in a large crowd of people, there would have been no way to really escape by foot. So what's he do? He gets on a boat at the Sea of Galilee. They're up in kind of the northeast corner of the lake. He gets on a boat. Thankfully, it wasn't like a Carnival cruise line where the whole crowd of people could have followed him. It was a small boat. It gave him a little bit of sense of solitude, and he was going to try to find a more private place. But here was the challenge. The Sea of Galilee is not this massive body of water. It's a decent-sized lake, but it's not a massive body of water. So the crowds see Jesus get into this boat. They see him kind of going out into the water, but he's still within eye shot. They can still see where he's at. And so as he begins to kind of drift away, they just follow him on foot around the north side of the lake all the way to where he lands, and look what happens next. When he finally lands, hoping that he gets a little bit of privacy, it says, when Jesus landed, he saw the large crowd. They were right there waiting for him. Now, I don't know what you would have done in this moment. If I'm trying to get away from the crowd and I'm trying to find a solitary place, and then the moment that I land, there's the crowd as my welcoming community, I'm probably feeling a lot of things in those moments. I'm probably feeling a little bit of anger. I'm probably feeling a little bit of frustration. I'm probably feeling a lot of probably ungodly feelings in that moment because I just want a little bit of time to myself. But look what it says about Jesus. It says when Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had what? He had compassion on them and he healed their sick. There's something about Jesus, and he always marvels me in this way, that he always had this ability to put the needs of others in front of himself. That even in a moment that he really needed to just draw away from the crowd had such needs that Jesus had compassion for him. Now, this word compassion, you get this sense that it's this deep, deep feeling. Again, not apathy, not indifference. This deep, deep feeling, this heartfelt response on their behalf. And I think in many ways, that is the heart response that God desires us to have for the needs of people all over the world. That at times, if you're anything like me, I can find my heart drifting into indifference or apathy, or maybe somebody else will do something about the need. But maybe we'd be people who model not only the life of Jesus, but the heart of Jesus, that in all circumstances, we become people who are deeply moved with compassion. And I would say it this way. We got a people that do this. We just see people with compassion. Will we just be people that just see others with compassion no matter what the situation might be? Now, I don't know about you, but I often don't see people with compassion. And oftentimes I have a different lens by how I view people. But may our primary lens be one of compassion. When somebody is in need, when somebody is hurting, when somebody needs a cup of water, when somebody needs something to eat, may we have the primary emotion be one that we are moved with compassion. Now, candidly speaking, at least from my perspective, sometimes I've got to see it through a different lens. And so not too long ago, I ran across one of those brain teasers on social media. I don't know if that comes up with your algorithm. I don't know what my algorithm is, but sometimes I get these brain teasers, and I kind of like them. I'll sit with them. I'll try to figure it out. I saw this one not too long ago, and it really stumped me. So I'm going to put it up for you, and I want you to take a look at this and help me understand which number is the correct number in order of these parking spaces. So you got 16, 6, 68, 88, and 98. What number is the parking space that this car is parked in? So think about it real quickly. Turn to somebody near you. Tell them the number that you think is covered up by the car. All right, so if you're in Crystal Lake, you're in South Lake, go ahead and turn to somebody near you. Tell them what you think it is. Now, I'll be candid with you. The first time I saw this, I looked at this and I'm like, I have no idea. I couldn't figure it out. I needed a different perspective. I needed to be able to see it through a different lens. With this image, if you just flip it 180 degrees and turn it over, it's a little bit easier to solve. So really quickly, turn to somebody near you now and tell them what the number is. Right? You can see it. It's 87. All you needed was a different perspective. Like all you needed was to see it through a different lens. And I think in many ways, that is the heartbeat of what we try to do through Celebration of Hope. That though sometimes our hearts will grow somewhat apathetic or somewhat indifferent, that sometimes we'll even grow frustrated with those who find themselves in a place that they have need, it serves us well to begin to see things through a different lens and see things through a different perspective. And I would say, would we always choose to see people through the lens of compassion? And I mean that not just as it relates to the global poor, but you know the person that kind of drives you crazy? I mean, you know the person that is overly critical of you? What if there's more going under the story that you can see on the surface? What if you just need a different lens or perspective? And what if we are people who our first response was one that we just choose to see people with compassion? What I'm moved by over and over again is that typically is the response of the global community. You think about the global partners and the work they do, that's oftentimes the response is just one of compassion. But once we kind of have this compassion as the driving force for us, here's the second piece that I want us to really lean into. It's this. I want us to be people who bring whatever we have to Jesus. That we just bring what we have to Jesus. However big or small it is, we bring it to Jesus. And so here's what it is. You have Jesus who's just landed what he hoped was a solitary place, but the crowd showed up again. So he's having to deal with and manage the crowd in some way. And so he begins to interact with the crowd and talk with the crowd and to teach the crowd, but it's growing actually quite late. You think I'm long-winded as a preacher? I'm just saying Jesus might have been a little bit long-winded. And so it's growing a little bit later in the day, and so here's what we find out next, what's happening in the story. It says, as evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, this is a remote place, and it's already getting late, so what did they do? They said, disciples like, we got to send these people away. We're kind of a remote place. There's no Chick-fil-A within walking distance. We gotta send them away so they can go to the villages and they can buy themselves some food. But look at Jesus' response. It says that Jesus replied, they do not need to go away. He said what? He says, you give them something to eat. Now notice the disciples see the problem. Big crowd of people. We learn how big the crowd of people is. Every one of the Gospels said that there were about 5,000, but it even says 5,000 men. And most of the Gospel accounts will tell you 5,000 men because they didn't count the women and the children back in that day. Now, hopefully we've come a long way that we in our current cultural climate, we would say that the women and children count today. But back in that cultural climate, they counted just the men. And so in the crowd of people, including the women and children, could have been 12 to 20,000 people. This is a massive crowd. When the disciples see this and evening's approaching, the remote area, there's no places to eat. The disciples see the problem. And they say, Jesus, we got to send the people away so they can go find themselves something to eat. And Jesus says, no, don't send them away. I want you to participate in something with me. And I would say oftentimes miracles start with the smallest acts of faith. Now the disciples are a bit confused with Jesus' response. And so here's the next verse. He says, we have here only what? 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, the disciples answered. Jesus says, bring them here to me. Because what may feel like something very small in your hands when placed in the hands of God can do way more than you ever ask or imagine according to his power that's at work within us. God's about to do something abundant with something that felt so scarce. And so the disciples are like, how in the world are we gonna feed these 12 to 20,000 people when all we have access to is 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish? Now Matthew doesn't tell us where these resources came from, but John does. Anybody know where the 5 loaves and the 2 fish came from? Book of John tells us, it says this, here is a what? A boy. In other words, some boy's mom packed him a sack lunch for the day. And he may have been the only one that even had some forward thinking to have anything that day, but notice who he was. This is one of those details that popped out to me this week that I'd never seen before. He was a boy, which means he wasn't even counted in the number. The one who was not even counted became the source of the miracle. Isn't that like God to do? The one that is uncounted, that is overlooked, that is forgotten by our culture, oftentimes is the very one that God uses in miraculous ways to do some world-changing types of things. If you've ever felt like my life is insignificant, it doesn't really matter much, I don't have a lot to give, I don't have a lot of resources, you're in really good company. Because oftentimes God uses that which is not even counted to be the very source of the miracle that he wants to produce. I love how God is doing that all over the globe through our global partnerships. We're partnered with a couple of different organizations. And in doing so, all of our work globally is done through the local church. We're very passionate about the work being done through the local church. Because that way, when we hand out the cup of water or the meal and the piece of food when we visit somebody in prison, it's not just that the physical need is getting met, it's being met in the name of Jesus. It's his name that gets lifted up. And so we get to take the very little that we have and put it in the hands of Jesus and allow God to do more than we could ever ask or imagine according to his power that's worked within us. We are partnered with 7,080 churches around the globe in different parts of the globe. Some of these leaders, these church leaders, they are overlooked. You'll never know their names. You'll never know the names of the churches. They'll never show up in the news. They wouldn't even be counted in our cultural climate. But isn't it like God to take those who are often uncounted and allow them to be the source of the miracle that he wants to bring in their community? Maria is one of those leaders. She serves a small church in Guatemala. We sent a team to Guatemala just a few weeks ago to capture the story of what God is doing through her life. Check out this story.
Mira que te mando que te esfuerces y seas valiente. No temas ni desmayes, porque Jehová tu Dios estará contigo en donde quiera que vayas. Llegaba el momento de dolor y de tristeza y necesitábamos agua y poder decir no hay agua. Y al día siguiente lo mismo, no tenemos agua. Pero todo lo vemos nosotros con la ayuda de Dios, ¿verdad? La misión de la iglesia no solamente pues, es acercar a las personas a Jesús, sino que también poder solucionar las necesidades y los problemas que surgen en la comunidad. Mi nombre es María Valenzuela. Yo a los 19 años tomé el ministerio para poder enfrentar los retos que existían en mi vida o en la comunidad y cómo poderlos solucionar como pastora.
Hola. ¿Cómo están? ¿Podemos pasar?
En San Martín había mucha necesidad. Porque no tenía su propia agua. No había un pozo. Si no había energía, no recibíamos agua. Pasábamos 2, 3, 5 días sin agua. Y agua que quizás pues, no era tan bien que nosotros la bebiéramos. Buscar mejorar este problema, dudé mucho. Tuve la responsabilidad de ver la necesidad del problema del agua. Sentía yo que me hacía falta algo. Me hacía falta mucho para ser pastora. Sentí mucho miedo, preguntándole a Dios que sí. ¿Por qué? ¿Para qué me quería Dios? Entonces, todas estas preguntas, Dios me las fue respondiendo poco a poco. Dios sabía qué propósito tenía para mí. Dios sabía qué planes tenía para mí. Dios me ayudó y me llevó a también poder ser parte de este problema y solucionarlo. Pensamos como iglesia que podemos buscar una solución para mejorar nuestra situación del agua. Yo sabía que mi comunidad iba a mejorar. Nos unimos todos como iglesia y también comunidad y también otras instituciones y municipalidad. Luego de que se finalizó el trabajo del pozo, se terminó ese trabajo de instalación de bomba. Luego vino el tanque. Entonces, para esto tú me llamaste, para esto tú me trajiste a este lugar. Aquella joven que inició con 19 años un ministerio, hoy aquí sigue.
Mañana voy a ir a la iglesia.
Aquí estoy al frente, no solo de una iglesia con 10 miembros, sino que al frente liderando en una comunidad también. Y ahora hemos disfrutado de la bendición de Dios, de nuestra propia agua, porque Dios nos ha usado a nosotros no solamente para las necesidades dentro de la iglesia, sino que para las necesidades de nuestra comunidad. Nuestra iglesia pudo alcanzar algo que hacía demasiado falta. Entonces, ahora lo vemos y sabemos que siendo poquitos, con las bendiciones de Dios, podemos hacer grandes cosas.
¿Son pastillas o es con gotero?
Es goterito.
Pero ahorita no quiero.
Ahorita no.
Hay que ir al centro de salud para que la
Va a estar bien, va a estar bien.
Véngase para acá.
Mire, nos mandó a toda esta gente a ayudarnos y estamos felices.
Sí, tenemos un proyecto
Completo. Y gracias a Dios y a ellos, ¿verdad?
Sí, a Él, seguimos su corazón.
often overlooked. Some would even say uncounted. And yet, the very source of the miracle that God is doing in her community. Pastor at 19 years old, now 24, really is becoming a leader in the community to bring about some incredible change. It's amazing we take just a little bit that we have and we put it in the hands of Jesus. God can do more than we could ever ask or imagine according to his power that's at work within us. It's a beautiful picture of how God typically works and how God desires to work with us. Let me give you a little bit of bonus content that doesn't show in the video. One of the things we always do when we talk to our global partners before we leave is we ask them, how can we pray for you? And just so you know, Pastor Maria's church meets in a building with only 3 walls. Not a lot of protection from the elements. Doesn't even really have a stable roof over the head. And so you would almost anticipate that if you asked her, how can we pray for you? Her initial response would be something that would be helpful for her and her church. But she didn't think about herself. In response, in a very selfless way, she says, I'm dreaming about a clinic to help meet the medical needs of our community. Can you pray that we might be able to serve our community in that way? I love the selflessness to take the little that she has and put it in the hands of Jesus and allow Jesus to do what she could never ask or imagine. It's a beautiful picture. In church, we are partnered with 7,080 churches. That story gets multiplied 7,080 times as God continues to use his people all across the world in miraculous kinds of ways. It's a beautiful picture. That we just take what we have and we put it in the hands of Jesus. And we do so, I think the last piece is this, that we can learn to trust Jesus for the miracle. I believe in a God who still does miracles. Do you agree? I don't think we just serve a God who did miracles a few thousand years ago. I believe in a God who still does miracles even to this day. And I'd actually like to think that we were a part of one that I'll tell you in just a minute. But let me take us back to the story of what happened. It says, as he directed the people to sit down in the grass, and then Jesus, he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and he looked up to heaven, he gave thanks, and he broke the loaves. And look what he says. Then he, help me out, gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. In other words, Jesus took these loaves and fishes, he gave thanks to God, he broke it, he multiplied it, but then he put it in the hands of the disciples to distribute. In other words, he called his closest friends to be participants in the miracle. I would say it draws the distinction between 2 things. There's a difference between what I'll call anticipatory hope and participatory hope. Let me give you the difference. Anticipatory hope basically is wishful thinking that we hope that something gets better. That we face a challenging circumstance or we're up against some difficult odds, and anticipatory hope kind of crosses your fingers and hopes that maybe, just maybe, someday it will be different. Participatory hope is different. What participatory hope does is it lives in the present. It recognizes the problem, but it believes if I'm willing to roll up my sleeves and get involved, that maybe, just maybe, God can and will do something different. Again, anticipatory hope, it just crosses your fingers. Participatory hope gets involved, gets active, is a part of the solution. I love that's what happens in this feeding of the 5,000 miracle, that Jesus, he could have just said, poof, there it is, and then all the food just shows up everywhere. He could have done that, but he didn't. He invited his disciples to participate in the miracle that would feed thousands of people. After they had eaten, here's what what happened afterwards. It says this, and they all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up how many baskets? 12 baskets full of broken pieces that were left over. There's significance in the number 12. Why? Because how many disciples were there? 12. In other words, there wasn't a single observer. They were all participants in what God was doing. I would go as far to say this. God has not stopped miraculously feeding thousands. And many of you were participants this week. Across all of our locations this past week, we filled these different envelopes of seeds. And we did so at each one of our campuses, most of which was last Sunday. I know Huntley had a packing event on Wednesday. South Barrington did some packing on Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. We packed lots of seeds. I don't know if you know this, but there were 7,984 participants across all of our locations packing seeds. And we put together these envelopes, and when you take 3 different envelopes and you put it together, we call this a family pack, because on the receiving end in Malawi and Zambia, they're gonna get 3 packs. It's a family pack. Just so you know, 226,211 family packs were packed. Each one of the family packs produces 2,000 pounds of food, because the seeds will grow plants that will lead to fruits and vegetables, and then those plants will produce seeds that can be replanted and produce more fruits and vegetables. These 3 envelopes, maybe you would call them as kind of similar to 5 loaves and 2 fish. What seemed like so little, and yet produces a lot. Now, I heard 2,000 pounds, and I'm like, that sounds like a big number, but how much is that really? Well, it's 12 baskets full, plus a lot more than that. Represents 2,000 pounds of food. These 3 seed packs produce everything that you see on the stage behind me. Do you think God is done doing miracles in the lives of people? And what you see represented here is multiplied over 226,000 families will be in the receiving end of what you're seeing here. I would call it nothing short of a miracle. God has not stopped feeding the thousands. And he doesn't just do it on his own. He chooses to do so with his people. We're not a people who anticipates hope. We're a people who participate in the hope. We will always be a church that rolls up our sleeves. We'll get down and dirty. We'll do the work. We want to partner with God in his global changing efforts to change the world. We get to be a part of a church that participates in hope, that shares hope, that brings hope, that celebrates hope. Here's the beautiful thing. What you see here is representative of what will happen on the global end, but what you also see here will be distributed this week through our care center. We also do the very same thing locally. I mentioned earlier, if you're newer around here, you're getting a snapshot of who we are as a church and what matters to us. We believe that one of the best ways to serve Jesus is to serve those in greatest need. And we don't just talk about it. We don't just anticipate it. We want to participate in the great work that God is doing locally and all over the world. We mentioned earlier that we're going to do a second offering today. We don't do that any other time. We do it once a year, where we take 2 offerings. The first offering we've already done, and that offering goes to fuel our ongoing ministries. And so in other words, everything that you see here that will be given out away this week through the care center, the first offering, it continues to fuel those types of things. All of our local ministry work, that work matters. And then once a year, we'll take a second offering. And the second offering is going to go to our global partners. And every dime, every dollar that is given will go to fuel God's work all over the globe. And I want to encourage you, even if you've never given, would you participate today? My number one goal is that literally every single person would participate. Every person in Wheaton, every person in the North Shore, every person in South Lake, every person at Crystal Lake, every person in Huntley, every person online, every person here at South Barrington, every single one of us has a role to play. We will all give different amounts, and that's okay. Just give whatever it is that God is calling you to give. But I want to encourage you, step out of your comfort zone. Do something sacrificial. Do something meaningful. It doesn't matter if it's a little or a lot. Take the little that you have, put it in the hands of Jesus, and Jesus can do a miracle in us and through us as a church. Do you believe that? So I want to call us to 100% participation and really being about changing the globe that we get to partner with. And so a couple of reminders. If you give a gift of $3, it'll provide everything that a refugee family needs for 1 month. If you give $35, it trains a farmer in Zambia to produce the fruits and vegetables you see behind me. $295 builds a bathroom in India. It provides dignity and safety for children and for women in the country. A $500 gift provides classroom technology for children who are in desperate need of education in Costa Rica. And then a $6,400 gift will drill a deep well, providing 2,600 people with clean water in Africa. I had a family that came up to me this week, and their young adult son in his 20s came to his mom and dad and said, what if we did a well together? And what if I contribute a third, and because you're mom and dad, what if you did 2/3? And what if we as a family, what if we provided a well together? And that's what they're going to do. I don't know what God is calling you to do, but would you participate in hope today? Would you celebrate hope today? Would you put the little that you have in the hands of Jesus and allow him to do something greater than we could ever ask or imagine according to his power that's at work within us? So at all of our locations, we're just gonna give you a moment. The band's gonna play a little bit of music, and as they do so, I wanna encourage you to seek the Lord out. God, what would you have me do? And then in that, if you came with somebody, you can have a conversation with them about what should we do? And then your campus pastor or host will be back in just a moment and will lead you through the giving moment. Let's take some time with God and say, God, what would you have me do? How can I participate in hope? Let's take that to the Lord together.